The fantasy football playoffs are here, and Easton Stick, Aiden O'Connell, Nick Mullins, Jake Browning, Mitch Trubisky, Gardner Minshew, Tommy DeVito, 2023 Joe Flacco, Desmond Ridder, Bryce Young, Zach Wilson, Bailey Zappi, Davis Mills, and Drew Lock are your starting quarterbacks. Good luck, ladies and gentlemen. We are going into a brutal 3-week stretch here. Hopefully, we can help you out in this. Let's go ahead and talk about everything that happened today. So starting off in Tampa, Rachaad White continues to dominate. Rachaad White continues to be a must-start guy every single week. I mean, only has 2 targets, but turns those targets into a receiving touch. 25 carries, 3 down bell cow, you start him. Going over to the receivers, Godwin dominates with targets. You have 11. Godwin really doesn't get there, right? No receiving touchdown. We're kind of used to this at this point. And then Mike Evans has himself a down week, but in reality, you don't need to panic. Baker Mayfield struggled, only 144 passing yards per game. You still start White every single week, still start Evans every single week, and Godwin remains a high-end wide receiver 3. Now, going over to the Atlanta side of things, first time in a long time, we've had some real passing volume here where Drake London goes out and has 172 receiving yards and 10 receptions. Y'all know 2 weeks ago, we had Drake London as that buy low guy. And now I'm not going to come out here and say he's a top 12 wide receiver. The man's probably a low-end wide receiver too. Like, you can start him. Like we said, in those leagues, we were looking to buy him low-end, 2 wide receivers, 3 flex spots. Or if it's a 14-team league, a deeper league like that, obviously London is someone that you can go towards. Now, really, the storyline is Kyle Pitts continues to expand his role here. Kyle Pitts actually does see 6 targets. Jonnu has 7, but Kyle Pitts does go out there and play more snaps than he's seen all year. He plays 61 snaps. Now, going over to the Colts game, you're looking at Gardner Minshew, 240 passing yards. I mean, really, not too much to talk about. Michael Pittman dominates targets. Zach Moss dominates snaps. I understand Zach Moss doesn't really get there from a fantasy perspective with only 28 rushing yards, 28 receiving yards. But underlying this, Moss does have 54 snaps played. So still start Pittman every week. Still start Zach Moss every week that Jonathan Taylor's out. And Jake Browning goes out there, continues to play well. I mean, I was not a buyer of Jake Browning this week. Ranked T. Higgins is someone you could not start. Higgins had himself a fine day, 72 receiving yards. What's very interesting in what we're seeing with Jake Browning is it's very different than what we've had in years past with Cincinnati. They are spreading the ball out. You have 3 targets to Chase Brown, 4 to T. Higgins, 4 to Mixon, 4 to Chase, 3 to Boyd, 3 to Hudson, 2 to Sample. In reality, they're spreading the ball out, and the offense probably isn't great. You still start Mixon every week. You still start Chase every week. Outside of that, nobody's super exciting. I will say Chase Brown will be someone that we have to talk about a little bit more in depth in our waiver wire video tomorrow. Now, going over to what we have with the Jacksonville Jaguars, I understand, yes, Trevor Lawrence does not look great on the stat sheet. The reality is, if you watch this game, Lawrence didn't really play that poorly. I know he had 3 interceptions. One of them was Ridley's fault. Evan Ingram absolutely dominates. The guy we had as a buy low candidate a few weeks back. Looks like Ingram is just going to be dominant with no Christian Kirk here. Calvin Ridley does see 13 targets. So I will say, even though y'all know I really didn't draft Ridley at all this year, going forward with no Christian Kirk in this offense, you are going to have to start Evan Ingram, start Calvin Ridley, and start Travis Etienne every single week. Zay Jones has 14 targets, which is very noteworthy. And in best ball, maybe he's viable in like an underdog tournament. But the reality of the situation is you're not going to be super excited about him from a shallow redraft perspective. Now, the Cleveland side of the ball, you have a split backfield here with Ford and Hunt. This is what you're used to. Kareem Hunt gets the rushing touchdown. Really can't start either one of these running backs that they're splitting. David Njoku absolutely dominates. Y'all know we are stressing that $1,000 draft we had on Underdog coming into the week. We look like we are going to be advancing. Big reason is David Njoku coming through for us. Amari Cooper also has 14 targets. And overall, Joe Flacco looks really good in this game. So I would say that you can definitely start David Njoku going forward. Definitely start Amari Cooper going forward. I mean, Njoku's been dominating with targets pretty much over the past month at this point. Now, going over to the Jets game, you're looking at Zach Wilson, decent on the box score, right? I mean, you have 301 passing yards, multiple passing touchdowns, and this was a very bad weather going up against the Houston Texans. The reality of the situation is nothing really changes here. You still start Breece Hall every single week in a full PPR format based off his receiving usage. He has 9 targets this week, obviously crushing with 8 receptions, 86 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. You still start Garrett Wilson every single week in a full PPR format. Given his target volume, he has 14 targets. Nobody else is viable. It's still a very bad offense where you should expect the floor is going to be very low from a week-to-week perspective. Now, going over to the Houston side of things, very, very frustrating here, where Nico Collins goes down at the beginning of the game. If we are looking at the amount of snaps that he plays, Nico Collins plays 3 snaps. Then afterwards, you have Xavier Hutchinson, Robert Woods, Noah Brown, John Mechie as the top weapons for CJ Stroud. No Dell, no Nico, no Schultz, in a game with very bad weather. And then you have CJ Stroud going down at the very end. So we go from the Houston Texans offense being one of the premier offenses in fantasy a month ago to now nobody really is startable. Now, if you look at the running back usage, very interesting to see that they've gone from Singletary to Pierce, now back to Singletary. Singletary is the guy, but ultimately, I mean, if you have this as one of the worst offenses in the NFL, I'm not super excited to go out there and play Devin Singletary. I mean, especially if it's just going to be flip-flopping back and forth where we don't really know who we can trust. Now, y'all know I am always one to downplay the importance of weather, where everybody is screaming weather, weather, weather. Baltimore, Los Angeles, the perfect example of this. Everybody terrified to go out there and start anybody in this game, and everybody plays well. Lamar, 3 passing touchdowns, 70 rushing yards, spreads the ball around. Really, the main takeaway here is Isaiah Likely looks startable in the absence of Mark Andrews. Zay Flowers continues to see a considerable amount of work with no Mark Andrews as well. So I'd say Zay Flowers, a borderline top 24 wide receiver going forward. Isaiah Likely, a low-end tight end 1. Lamar, obviously, the elite level quarterback with this rushing upside. And Odell will be someone that we talk about again on our waiver wire video tomorrow. So just make sure you're subscribed. And going over to what we have with the running backs, they're turning this into a 3. They're not turning it into anything. It's always been a 3-man running back by committee. All these guys are always sells once one pops off. So don't be trusting Keaton Mitchell. I don't even know if we had him ranked at our top 60 flex rankings this week. I know he's exciting. I know people want to get hype. It's a 3-man running back by committee. I mean, you have 29 snaps for Hill, 25 for Mitchell, 20 for Gus Edwards. Nobody can be trusted. Now, going over to the Rams side of things, Kyron Williams continues to dominate as a workhorse. Kyron Williams, 69 snaps out of a potential 77. Looking at the receiving usage, everything is funneled through Puka and Cooper Kupp. Demarcus Robinson does come away with 10 targets. Honestly, we don't need to be too concerned about Demarcus Robinson. Kupp has 10 targets, 115 receiving yards, and the receiving touchdown. And if you looked at what doctors on Twitter were saying coming into this game, they were saying that this is about the timeline you should expect with Kupp finally being healthy. So seeing this performance, it lines up with his rehab from his ankle injury. Probably makes sense to start Cooper Kupp going forward. And then Puka continues to play well. I know he only scores 13 points in this game, but if you looked at what was actually happening out there, I mean, Puka was just absolutely crushing for you. Now, one of the pick'ems that we missed on Underdog this week, we did crush a decent amount of our pick'em calls, but one of them that was frustrating is we took Justin Fields for fewer than, I believe it was like 270 total yards. Fields averages 160 passing yards through his entire NFL career. Fields ended up getting there. Fields had about 290 in terms of his total yardage. Obviously, getting out there with the rushing upside, very exciting from a fantasy perspective. Gives you the rushing touchdown as well. And then DJ Moore did lead the game for a little bit. I know people were worried. DJ Moore continues to dominate with Justin Fields under center. It's just a really good matchup going up against the Lions. And underlying this running back usage, really nobody is going to be viable. 39 snaps for Deonta Foreman, 20 snaps for Roschon, 12 snaps for Khalil Herbert. If you're looking at the Underdog pick'ems coming into this week, they had all these running backs around like 20 total yards. So it's really hard to trust any of these guys in fantasy. I'd say none of them are startable when it's a 3-man running back by committee. But our revenge pick'em for Monday night, ladies and gentlemen, I'm confident with this one. We're going to be going Derrick Henry for fewer than 55.5 rushing yards. Right now, the spread on this game is 13.5 points. And if you are looking at what Derrick Henry has done in games where the Tennessee Titans get blown out, nada, zip, nothing. And of course, if you want to check out any of those pick'ems over on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description, in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers. And code FLUX also going to give you to a special pick 'em more than less than half a total yard. Now, going over to the Lions side of things, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, both have flashes. They're both hyper efficient, obviously running behind one of the best offensive lines in the league. This offense struggles a bit. Amon-Ra St. Brown still has 9 targets. Sam Laporta still has 6. To be honest with you, it's just tough in a division road game. I'm not going to be changing too much here when it comes to how we are looking at this team. I think you still start Gibbs, Montgomery, St. Brown, and Laporta every single week. And really, outside of that, nothing else matters. Now, moving over to the Carolina game, I would say this was probably the ugliest game of the week. You had 137 passing yards from Bryce Young. Really, none of the receivers are viable with how bad this passing offense is. But if you look at the underlying snaps, Chuba Hubbard does go back to having that 3-down workload. Once Miles Sanders came back in, I was like, oh, okay, what's this situation going to be like? No, Chuba Hubbard's 3-down back. He has 62 snaps compared to Miles Sanders at 17. And Hubbard had a little bit of an injury scare in this game as well. So it really does go to show that he is just the true 3-down bell cow. And then going over to the New Orleans side of things, I mean, Alvin Kamara can consistently go out there and start. Jamal gets a little more usage. Jamal has been trending in the right direction, but that doesn't matter too much. Olave does get there with the receiving touchdown, but ultimately can't trust anybody in here until Derek Carr is hopefully benched. I mean, I know they get the win, but Derek Carr has 26 passing attempts and 119 passing yards. Derek Carr is one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the NFL right now, and half the league is a backup. Now, going over to Minnesota, devastating game. Justin Jefferson gets hit. Justin Jefferson goes down, does not return to this game. And on top of this, keep in mind, this Vikings team really doesn't have anything to play for, right? You have Alexander Mattison also getting injured with the ankle. So Madison leaves the game. Jefferson leaves the game. Joshua Dobbs is so bad that in 23 pass attempts, he has 63 passing yards. They have to replace him with Nick Mullins. TJ Hawkinson's still going to be a must-start guy as that elite level tight ends, just based off talent and talent alone, especially if you have no Jefferson. Maybe Ty Chandler is going to be someone that we are looking at when we have no Alexander Mattison, knowing that Ty Chandler should see almost every single touch out of this backfield. But we are going to have to monitor the injury updates that we have with this team over the next few days. Now, going over to the Raiders game, Josh Jacobs also gets injured here, so we'll be looking at the backup running backs, most likely Zamir White with the waiver wire video for tomorrow. Aiden O'Connell looks horrendous. Looks like maybe they should go back to Jimmy G. I don't even know what you do at this point. Devontae Adams still a must-start guy. Sees 10 targets, has all the target volume. So you start Adams based off of volume, but outside of that, we're not super excited about anything here if you have no Josh Jacobs. Now, going over to the Seattle game, I really did not want to start anybody when you had no Geno Smith, when Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet were both banged up. And yeah, look at the running back usage. Neither guy looks startable until they're hopefully healthy, until this offense is better. It's just a tough matchup going up against San Fran. Going over to the receivers, I mean, they spread the ball out a ton. JSN leads the team with targets in 7. But you have Kenneth Walker with 5 targets. Noah Fant with 4 targets. Kobe Parkinson gets the receiving touchdown. So they're spreading the ball around a ton. I mean, while Lockett does get there with 6 receptions, 89 receiving yards, and you have the long receiving touchdown for DK Metcalf, I still do think it's probably a little bit tough to rely on anybody comfortably here. Obviously, DK Metcalf did get ejected at the end of the game, but shouldn't have too much of an impact. I mean, he ran 36 out of 38 potential routes, so don't think that changes really much at all. Now, going over to the Niners side of things, it is just so crazy the production you can comfortably expect from these guys. Christian McCaffrey, 145 rushing yards, over 150 total yards. Deebo Samuel, 150 receiving yards and the receiving touchdown. Brandon Ayuk, 126 receiving yards. Could have been bigger if he didn't have the fumble. I mean, he almost had a long receiving touchdown that he dropped. I mean, he didn't drop it, fumbled it. And then George Kittle gets there with the long receiving touchdown as well. Brock Purdy looks like a must-start guy. This looks like the best offense. I don't want to say the best. Looks like one of, if not the best offenses. Definitely the best team in the NFL, at least in my mind. And it is just crazy how every single one of these guys is so damn good. I can't remember the last time that you had an elite running back, an elite tight end, 2 elite level wide receivers from the same offense. And they're not just okay. They are elite right now. Now, going over to the Denver game, gross one, Javonte does get there. We had him as the buy low candidate 2 weeks back, just saying, okay, we're probably going to get a little more rushing efficiency, maybe a rushing touchdown. Finally gets there with the rushing TD. And suddenly we keep on saying, oh, okay, yeah, this is going to be a spot where his touchdowns come back down to earth, right? I don't know. I mean, 4 targets and a receiving touchdown. Sutton at this point must have a touchdown rate closing on 15%, reminiscent of like Robert Tonyan back 3 years ago in Green Bay. Absolutely nuts. Reality, I mean, coming off 4 targets, I'm not super excited to play Sutton next week, even if he continues to get there. Javonte, I'm still going to be starting, but they do use P. Ryan a considerable amount as a receiver. Now, Justin Herbert breaks his right index finger. It's a team that's not playing for anything either. Easton Stick looks to be the starting quarterback. There are reports coming into the game saying that they were going to use Isaiah Spiller. They were going to use Joshua Kelly in that committee with Austin Eckler, and they were going to ride the hot hand. Eckler did get the majority of the work. Eckler did have the rushing touchdown at the same time. Now, really, I don't know. If you have no Herbert, I think it's going to be such a bad offense that I'm not super excited about anybody. You start Keenan Allen based off target volume. He had 12 targets in this game. But with no Herbert, you lower your expectations for Keenan. You can start Eckler if you really wanted to, but I'd lower my expectations as well. And then going over to the Buffalo Chiefs game, I'd say probably the most exciting game of the week. I'm right now watching the Dallas-Philly game, so hopefully this one comes in and is great for us. Really need a big Hurts and Goddard day. But anyway, looking at this Buffalo game, James Cook gets there, both with the receiving usage as well as the rushing usage. James Cook remains someone you're starting every week. Josh Allen remains someone you're starting every single week, especially with the rushing upside. And then going over to what we have with Stephon Diggs, I understand he disappoints. He has 11 targets. Don't panic. The main thing I ought to be pointing out is while Dalton Kincaid, yes, only scores 7 points, Dalton Kincaid was number 2 in this team in targets with 8. So while maybe having Dawson Knox back into this offense is going to negatively impact Kincaid, I still think that Dalton Kincaid will be someone that you are starting going forward. And he's still a mid to, at the absolute worst case, low-end tight end 1 rest of season. Now, going over to the Chiefs, you have the Rashee Rice breakout game. Rice could have had a bigger, it ended up fumbling a ball very similar to Brandon Ayuk. It wasn't as big of a deal. But nonetheless, if you are looking at what we have here, Kelsey, Rice will both be must-start options going forward. Mahomes continues to be a little bit of a disappointment. The running back usage, you do have more Clyde Edwards-Helaire than Jerick McKinnon. Jerick McKinnon has 3 targets out of the backfield compared to Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 4. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has 11 carries out of the backfield compared to Jerick McKinnon at 4. McKinnon gets there with the rushing touchdown. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the better guy in terms of the usage. So it is a little bit frustrating if you started Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which I did in a few leagues. The reality of the situation is Isaiah Pacheco is probably going to be back next week, and you're probably just going to play Pacheco. But hopefully you are in the fantasy football playoffs, ladies and gentlemen. I truly am wishing you the best of luck. I'm going to try my absolute best to submit good rankings later this week for you. And yeah, if you wanted to check out any of those pick'ems for tomorrow night on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season rankings and tiers, and a 2 special pick'em more than less than half a total yard. My favorite pick'em right now is going to be Derrick Henry for fewer than 55.5 rushing yards, with this game having a 13.5 point spread going up against Miami. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Really do appreciate you. Really hope you had a great Sunday, and really hope I get to see you out in the live stream on Monday night.